All right, here we are, the West Coast Hockey League. Although, technically, for that season, the last year was known as the Western Hockey League. That's right. This league was born with the Eskimos and the Tigers, Edmonton and Calgary, who'd been part of what was the Big Four. There were 2 Edmonton teams, 2 Calgary teams. They were amateurs, and it was supposed to be all Alberta-born players. The Big Four collapsed, and I didn't find any evidence of that league ever winning an Allen Cup. That's what it was created for, was the Allen Cup. So the Stanley Cup became the championship trophy that was awarded to professionals. The Allen Cup was awarded to amateurs. And, of course, the Allen Cup still played for today. So it has really, really far-reaching roots that go back to, well, before here. Now, the collapse was due to, well, basically trying to make that work as a Metro League. It wasn't. And then there was battles between Calgary and Edmonton, which is going to be a surprise to everybody, based on players that played for Edmonton, who they said, hey, those guys haven't lived in Alberta long enough to be amateurs with this league, and you shouldn't be paying them, and they shouldn't be on your team. So the argument continued to the point where they're like, let's just create a new league. And when they created the new league, the Regina Capitals and the Saskatoon Sheiks were a part of it. Now, midway through the first season, the Sheiks are moved to Moose Jaw. They're moved to Moose Jaw, and they fold. The Moose Jaw Sheiks fold. So in 1922-23, the league goes back to Saskatoon, because they get it. This is a Prairies League. Edmonton, Calgary, Regina, Saskatoon. You kind of got to have the 4. We'll get to that 5th one that's missing, and I'm sure there's fans that are like, hey, we were missing. We'll get there. The Saskatoon Crescents are born, and they don't do particularly well. So in the first season, the Edmonton Eskimos are 15-9. That's right. The Regina Capitals are 14-10. Calgary Tigers are 14-10. The Saskatoon or Moose Jaw Sheiks are 5-19. So it's a disaster for them. In a playoff between Regina and Edmonton, Regina wins the first year. Regina goes on and loses to Vancouver. Vancouver will go on to the Stanley Cup final. As it was decided that this league and the Pacific Coast League would play off to decide who got into the Stanley Cup final. In 1922-23, so after Saskatoon gets another team, Edmonton 19-10-1, Regina 16-14, Calgary 12-18, Saskatoon Crescents 8-20-2. The Edmonton Eskimos win that year, and they move on to challenge for the Stanley Cup. That's right. That's why I'm doing this today after doing the 21-22 NHL season. 1923-24, the Calgary Tigers 18-11-1. They end up winning the playoff against Regina, who are 17-11-2. Saskatoon's 15-12-3, and Edmonton falls on hard times at 11-15-4. 1924-25, Calgary 17-11, Saskatoon 16-11-1. Oh look, it's the Victoria Cougars, who were 16-12, won the playoff and won the Stanley Cup. The Edmonton Eskimos 14-13-1. Vancouver Maroons, who had been the Millionaires previously, 12-16. The Regina Capitals 8-20. So Regina kind of flops. The WHL comes in. Regina franchise no longer exists. Instead, we get the Portland Rosebuds. Remember the Rosebuds from the PCHA? They're back. Edmonton 19-11. Saskatoon 18-11-1. Victoria finishes 15-11-4, but they again win in the playoffs. The Portland Rosebuds 12-16-2. Calgary 10-17-3, and Vancouver's last season as the Maroons 10-18-2. So what happened? Well, see, it basically never really completely got on its feet. Newsy Lalonde led Saskatoon in 22-23. Newsy Lalonde was a big star at the time, and they tried to attract big stars to the WCHL like the PCHA did in the video I did yesterday, but it really didn't work. And it didn't work for long when it did work. The PCHA in 1924 challenged for the Cup, and then the WCHL. Frank Patrick, president of the PCHA, insisted on that. And Frank Patrick was one of the founders of the Pacific Coast Hockey Association. I don't understand why he'd argue that he wanted to face them first. Wouldn't you want to get the break and let the West Coast League face them first, and then you face what's left over? All right, well, he got that, and it didn't matter because Montreal ran both of them over. 1925, Vancouver and Victoria joined from the collapsed PCHA, which brought it back up to 6 teams. The Saskatoon team was renamed the Sheiks. So maybe they failed for that. You get the Sheiks, they move. So you get a team, you call them the Crescents. Then a couple of years later, you're like, you're going to call them the Sheiks again. Why? It collapsed in 1926 due to money, and there's no team in Winnipeg. The plan that they had, and they were never able to make work, was they wanted to have 2 teams in Winnipeg. The city of Winnipeg was the largest city in the prairies at that point, and they wanted to have 2 teams in Winnipeg like the NHL had with Montreal. You had the Montreal Maroons and Montreal Canadiens, and that helped stabilize the league. They felt that Winnipeg could do that for them. Winnipeg did not have a team. The league was also selling its players to the NHL when 1925-26 rolled around because they just couldn't pay them. They couldn't afford to pay them. And in the end, the Victoria Cougars players were bought by Detroit. So this Victoria team here became the Detroit Cougars, who became the Detroit Red Wings. The Portland Rosebuds, they had their rights bought by the Blackhawks. So this team right here became the Chicago Blackhawks, the players on that team. The New York Rangers didn't get into any of this. So when the original 6 were coming in, the Rangers were like, we're not doing any of that. And the Rangers actually ended up dominating in the NHL, as we'll see when we go along in the NHL series. But it's interesting to note, Portland became Chicago, Victoria became Detroit. So if you live in Victoria and you need an NHL team to cheer for, maybe you should be cheering for the Red Wings. The NHL Board of Governors paid $258,000 for the rights to all of the Western Hockey League players. And that was the end of the Cup challenges. This was the last year that a team outside the NHL challenged for the Stanley Cup. But it was a loophole. It was there. That a team that was recognized as a professional league could challenge for the Stanley Cup until 1947 when the NHL said this is silly, and they made it so that it was entirely a National Hockey League trophy. And it's funny because it's kind of in a way too bad. Imagine if there was an NHL challenge system now where a KHL champion could come over and say, we challenge for the Stanley Cup, and they win it. That is as crazy as that sounds. Victoria was able to make that happen, and that's a video that's going to be occurring in the next few days, where we'll get into what Victoria did, because that's going to be a little bit different, right? This is an NHL series, but a team comes in from the West Coast Hockey League and wins it. Wasn't the WHL until its last season. But it's funny because you look at this, and you know, Regina's a city that comes up a lot when I talk about relocation and expansion, but Regina does not have the population base. Saskatchewan in general is just, it's not populated enough to be able to support what the NHL would want. It doesn't have that corporate money. So it's fun here, and it's fun to talk about it. It's fun to see Saskatoon on the board, and Victoria as well. Victoria is another one that it wouldn't be able to be an NHL city. But Portland might eventually get in there. So the one that's not on the board, of course, is Seattle, which has been talked about over the last few days and definitely over the last year. But this was that time that there was another league that tried, and this was a professional league, but they just couldn't compete with NHL money. And I think whenever we talk about, you know, there should be a new rival league to come up against the NHL, it's always going to be money where they lose out to the NHL. So there you go. The West Coast Hockey League, which existed from 1921 till 1926. And then when they had, out of the ashes of this came the Prairie Hockey League, but that was only seen as an amateur league by the NHL. They weren't putting up with more of those challenges. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. I'll talk to you again soon.